Welcome to the After Chat. I'm Michael.
I'm Madison.
And today we are going to be talking about obedience.
Yeah.
There we go. You ready?
I sure am.
Let's do it.
Welcome to the After Chat. Real questions. Real talk. Real life.
All right. So what's the weirdest thing you believed as a kid?
I was struggling to come up with something. I think I'm on the opposite end of believing weird things as a child because we had so many rules about what we could watch. We didn't do magic. We didn't do Santa Claus. We did VeggieTales only. So I'm sure that I had some kind of strange beliefs about something, but nothing really. My mom was just great at explaining things anytime I had questions. So I really don't know that I had anything.
Not a whole lot of razzle dazzle and whimsy.
No.
Oh, okay.
Not really.
Okay.
Just kind of stuck to the facts.
Gotcha. Probably the weirdest would be a jackalopes, that they were real. Are you familiar with what a jackalope is?
Yeah.
Okay, so my grandpa had one that was on the wall, and I have it now. We'll put a picture right in here. So he had a jackalope that was hanging on his wall, and whenever it just appeared one day, whenever we were all kids, this was myself and all my cousins. We was like, wow, what is that? And he's like, that's a jackalope. And we was like, whoa. And it's a little rabbit with ears, or a rabbit with horns. And we was like, where did you get it? He's like, oh, I shot that out in Kansas with my bow and arrow and then tracked it for miles and miles in the snow. And now here it is. And so we believed that. My cousins and we all believed that jackalopes were real.
Nice.
And would tell everybody that my grandpa got one. And I believed that for a long, an absurd long period of time. And yeah, and so whenever he passed, my grandma asked me if I wanted anything of grandpa's. And so I said, I want the jackalope. And we decorate it for Christmas every year.
Oh my
we put little things around his horns.
That's
and
awesome.
he has a little hat that he wears.
Nice.
And I went to Things Remembered in the mall and got a name tag made for it. I named it Odell, which is my grandfather's middle name,
Aww.
and mounted that on the little wooden thing that the jackalope is taxidermed to.
Nice.
And so, yeah, I love it. I think it's super cool.
That's awesome.
And yeah, believed it for a ridiculously long time that jackalopes were in fact real.
Nice. I caught wind of the common joke when I was a kid of people. I can't remember what it's called, but it's some animal that you is it you send people out hunting into the
Snipe.
Yes. I heard people talk about, oh, haha, isn't that so funny? But I was never in a situation to be set up to fall for it or really any other mythical creatures believing that they existed.
See, I never heard of a snipe hunt until there's an episode of King of the Hill where they take the Order of Straight Arrow kids or whatever out on a snipe hunt, and that's one of my favorite episodes of that.
Such a good show. Man.
Yes. So we have a weird one here. Would you rather fight one horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses?
I feel like it's important to really figure out what breed of duck this is.
Really? Well, a Pekin duck, those are bigger than your average mallards. So
hopefully not that one.
Yeah, that's the big white barn ducks.
Yeah. Some ducks are more intense than other ducks. As long as it's not whatever the Canadian geese are around here that are super mean.
Yeah.
Then I feel like either way I might stand a chance.
So that's not that's a goose.
Yeah.
Like I'm
As long as it's not the goose. If
Yeah.
it's just duck, even if it's the different variants of it, I feel like, I don't know. I feel like the goose would be particularly intimidating because they freak me out.
I mean, one of those the size of a horse would be right frightful.
Terrifying.
Yeah.
But if it's like a cute little mallard, those aren't so bad. I'm going to assume mallard. I'm going to read mallard when I think of this question.
Yes.
I would say as much as 100 duck-sized horses freak me out, I still like just thinking of it. What are they going to do? They can't climb up on you.
I mean, I'm fighting the duck-sized horses all day. Like they'd have to run up, spin around, and like kick.
Which they probably don't have much oomph behind their kick if they're that small.
I mean, I feel like I could just punt them right away.
They could bite you. That might hurt.
Yeah. I'm going duck-sized horses. I'm not fighting a horse-sized bird. Like that's terrifying to me.
I don't think it would go well.
They're little mini dinosaurs and they're atrocious, and I'm not messing with them.
I feel like fighting the 100 duck-sized horses would end in have you ever been like ambushed by like a bunch of puppies?
Yes.
Where they're like even though
jumping
they're like
and scratching and
they
all
think that they're getting you, but they're not really getting you. I
Yeah.
feel like that might be the case for the
Yeah.
duck-sized horses. Like they
Yes.
think they're crushing it, and you're just like giggling.
Yes. No, I'm going duck-sized horses.
Yeah.
All right, so today we're going to be talking about obedience, and we're going to be looking at a couple examples of people that did various degrees of obeying God.
Mm-hmm.
So I love this one because when was the last time you were obedient to what God has told you? And for me, it's like anytime I act contrary to my base nature.
Yeah.
It's probably and I did that today. Like whenever I'm driving and I get kind of frustrated, and instead of resist the urge to honk or shake fist or anything else, like that's me like being obedient to what God wants me to do. And that comes more natural now over time, but sometimes whenever you're just having an off day, or anytime whenever I feel the need to grumble or complain, and I take a second before I let my tongue just go wild and spit venom, and I ask myself, like, is what this person's saying actually true?
Mm-hmm.
That happened probably yesterday or the day before. And so, I mean, those were recent examples of I feel like submitting my will and my natural inclinations to be obedient to what God has told me.
Yeah, I would definitely agree that it's an everyday thing, but in the sense of I'm not always aware of it every day, as much as I feel maybe I should be aware of it. Some days are easier than others, I guess is the better way to put that. This morning, like in particular, I really did not want to slow down in the morning and take time to read and pray. Like I just did not want to. I wanted to keep sleeping, and I knew I had like a little bit more of a relaxed morning than usual. Like I didn't have to leave right away. And I kind of just wanted to sit there and watch YouTube all morning.
Yeah.
And I really didn't want to. But I did it anyways. And it felt good afterwards, but leading up to it, I was like, man, I could just do it later. Or like I was like putting all of the qualifiers in.
Yes.
I could change I could do it on the car on the way there and like listen to the scripture. And anytime I try to talk myself out of something or like have the conversation in my head for too long, I'm like, we're veering off the path. Our next question is about if we were afraid to follow through on what he told us to do. I feel like both of these situations, the everyday stuff they're not really the things that you would necessarily always feel afraid to follow through.
Yeah.
I do have an example from like a couple nights ago. Yeah, a couple nights ago.
Tuesday.
Yeah.
It's a Tuesday for us.
Yeah. So it was Sunday night. We had our first night back at Students for this campus because we had been off for a couple weeks.
Yes.
And I have a really hard time feeling confident and comfortable approaching people and having like casual conversation with them in like a mingling setting. It is so far from anything that I ever want to have to do. I don't love it, but I was out of the rhythm with it because we had a couple weeks away from students. But I put that to the side a little bit. I don't think I did as well with it as I wish that I caught myself too late in that open mingle time to adjust my attitude. But once I did, and gave myself the little pep talk of like it might feel weird and awkward and scary, and then jumped into it. It was, of course, it was fine.
Yes.
And that's not something that like God has specifically sat down and said you must mingle with teenagers, but it's part of the role that I signed up for when I decided to serve as students.
Yeah, and if you feel like you're called to do like serving students like that, the one thing you need to be able to do is build a rapport, especially for that age group, or they're not going to connect with you or open up at all. So to live out that obedience in a way that actually honors God and isn't half-hearted.
Yeah. It gets uncomfy sometimes.
Yes, it does.
Do you have a recent example that's one that you might have been a little bit more afraid?
I don't know if afraid's the right word. I guess it's more like I just don't wanna. Like I get that. I have one that I'll talk about where I like maybe I didn't get it quite right or wrong. Like we each have examples of those later. But for this one, I mean, I guess it could be afraid because you don't want to set down like some hurts, resentments, and things that you might be grumpy about because it feels good to hold them. Like,
it feels so good.
Yeah. And so the other night, whenever I was praying, and from time to time I'll pray like, God, seek me out, and if there's anything that you find fault in me. And it wasn't like 3 seconds, and that one I usually do audibly. Like there's something that there's times where I do like to pray inside my mind. Like obviously I don't want to be like sitting in a meeting and just start like vocally praying. Like,
yeah, God.
like help me to get through this or say the right thing. Like that might come off as kind of weird, but whenever I'm like in my room at home or in the car, like I will pray audibly there. And it wasn't like 2 seconds after I got that part out where it was just like a clear conviction of pray for this, like this thing that I've been kind of holding to. And I didn't like it, but like sometimes you just have to obey, like to get to where we're going. And I mean, Jesus isn't like, he refers to himself as our friend, and, because I'm your friend, I will tell you about my Father's business and all these other things. But Jesus is also our King, and sometimes you just have to obey even when you don't want to. And so I don't know if that really fits the afraid thing. I know one of the things that did make me kind of nervous at the beginning was like taking on leadership roles. And like those did cause a little bit of fear, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later.
Yeah.
So we're going to be looking at Judges today, and we're going to be looking at two very specific ones and looking at them through the lens of varying degrees of obedience and how God can use what we do in obedience to him, even if it is sometimes half-hearted or not all the way, or and the varying levels of success that brings to us. So you're going to be looking at Deborah first.
I am, yeah. So Deborah is, we can find her story in the book of Judges, which just a really quick summary of what the role was as a judge for the Israelite nation. They were leaders for the nation of Israel, specifically in the time frame between Joshua having taken them into the Promised Land. It was in between Joshua and when they finally were sick of not having a king, and so they ended up getting a king. So in that time frame, there were several judges, and unfortunately, it sort of just went downhill. The further you go into Judges, kind of the more downhill the experience goes.
There's a clear cycle.
I think I could be wrong. I didn't actually write this in my notes. I think Deborah is the third judge. She may be either the third or fourth judge. I should have written that down. But their role in their role they were both military leaders and spiritual leaders, which is kind of like a unique spot to be in this role. And there was like a very consistent cycle of with Israel in this particular time frame. It extended past this time frame for sure, but kind of concentrated right here with the judges. It was a cycle of they initially disobeyed God because they didn't drive out all of the Canaanites from the promised land. So that's something that sort of stuck around since Joshua's time. And so they would disobey, and they would look towards other gods and get distracted by the Canaanites in the area and let them influence their culture. So they would disobey, and then they would face oppression from those Canaanites, and then based out of the oppression, they would cry out to God to deliver them, and then of course God would deliver them, and it was often through the wisdom of a judge.
And I just checked it out. It's Deborah was the fourth, and Gideon that we're going to be looking at is the fifth. So we're looking at two successive judges.
Sweet. Okay. So Deborah is the only female judge. She was also a prophetess, and her story is told to us in Judges 4 and 5. She led Israel during a time of oppression by the Canaanite king Jabin. And his army, the person who was in charge of his army was Sisera. So we have two names here. We have Jabin and Sisera. So Deborah calls in this other guy. I believe it's pronounced Barak. And she kind of sets the scene for him of what he is supposed to do from what God is telling her. So I'm going to read starting in Judges 4:6. She, being Deborah, sent for Barak, son of Abinoam from Kadesh in
Naphtali.
I was doing so good until that one.
You're awesome.
Thank you. And she said to him, "The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun and lead them up to Mount Tabor. I will lead Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army," this is the bad guys, with his chariots and his troops to the Kishon River and give him into your hands. Barak said to her, "If you go with me, I will go, but if you don't go with me, I won't go." "Certainly I will go with you," Deborah said, "but because of the course you are taking, the honor will not be yours, for the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman." So they go back and forth. Barak is like, "I hear you, but I'm still scared and I still want to obey, but I need some support here." So she goes with him. During this battle where Barak's forces are fighting with Sisera's army, Sisera dips. He runs out of there, and he ended up finding refuge with Jael, who she's a woman, and she's not actually an Israelite, which is interesting to me. So we're told that she's a Kenite, which is a nomadic tribe. In the same area, and they were often on good terms with Israelites as well. Fun fact: Abraham's father-in-law Jethro was also a Kenite. So there's some familiarity there between those two groups of people. So he finds Jael. Jael is like, "Come hang out in my tent. You're going to be safe. Don't worry. Don't be afraid." And he ends up falling asleep. And once he falls asleep, she takes a tent peg and drives it through his skull. So she kills him, and that fulfills Deborah's prophecy of that Barak wouldn't get that
sweet honor.
Yeah,
and glory.
exactly for getting rid of Sisera. So that's the entire story that we see of Deborah there is in Judges 4. But then the fun part is that in Judges 5, we get the Song of Deborah, which is a poetic retelling telling of the victory. It's both the voice of her and Barak going back and forth about everything that happened. They're praising God. They're celebrating how Jael interacted with the story, and it's all like, yay, good news. God delivered us, and because of this, Israel entered a time of peace for 40 years.
And that's really what goes back to the cycle that you had mentioned at the top of it, of disobedience, being oppressed, crying out, and then God delivering them. And that is the sin cycle, like completely just spelled out there, where you go out, you go your own way, you do your own thing, you find yourself suffering the consequences of that behavior. You then have nowhere else to go to but God. And God comes out and delivers you, and then you go back to, kind of smooth sailing. And then you get what in like the new, or what the King James version like typically calls haughty, and then you go right back into the cycle again.
Yep.
And you see that that's one of the things that is really what really speaks to me in the story of the Judges, and again in the Kings.
Yeah.
Like you get it through this period of time, but then you also get it in the various Kings chapters as well. And so after the end of that 40-year period, like most of the chapters in Judges starts with Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, and they then found themselves under the yoke of the Midianites.
What a surprise.
Again, like you just keep going right back to that well.
Who knew that was going to happen?
And so that's where Judges 6 picks up. And Gideon was called to rescue Israel this time. And you get kind of so I'll give you a quick big overview, and then we'll kind of look at a couple examples where you see where this is going right from the get-go. So even though he was reluctant and constantly seeking signs, Gideon did obey, and with just 300 men, which kind of gets whittled down to 300 in a very funny way, defeated the massive, huge Midianite army through God's power. And after victory, he refused to be a king. Everybody was wanting him to be a king, and he said no and made a golden ephod, which was kind of like a tunic or something that they would wear over their chests. And he made a golden one out of some Midianite gold that he looted, and set that up and said, I'm not going to be your king, but here's this as a reminder of what God did. And then they eventually started worshiping it, and everything went sideways. So that's the big picture view of Gideon. So his calling began with a little bit of humor in chapter 6 in verse 11 and 12. We read this. The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah that belonged to Joash the Abiezrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. And when the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." So Gideon's a farmer, and he's threshing wheat inside of a wine press so nobody can see him doing it. And so he's kind of hiding in fear. But the angel of the Lord says, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." So there's a little bit, it just paints kind of a funny picture. So he's hiding and threshing. So we get a picture of this guy. He's a fearful fella. And that kind of speaks to something that he's going to be experiencing throughout the rest of his story. And so we pick back up in 25, verse 25 in that same chapter 6. The same night the Lord said to him, "Take the second bull from your father's herd, the one that is 7 years old. Tear down your father's altar to Baal," because they had gone back into idol worship, "and cut down the Asherah pole beside it." This was something that they also worshiped this deity as well. Then build a proper kind of altar to your Lord at the top of this height, using the wood of the Asherah pole that you cut down. Offer the second bull as a burnt offering. So Gideon took 10 of his servants and did as the Lord told him. But because he was afraid of his family and the townspeople, he did it at night rather than in the daytime. So instead of just boldly obeying, the angel of the Lord came to him, and Gideon played it safe by acting in secret. And so this is just another example of a fearful, it's still obedience, but a kind of.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're not going to go out and put your neck on the line. You're not going to boldly step into the calling that God called you to.
That's interesting. I'm sorry to interrupt
No, you're
you.
good, you're good.
It reminds me of the beginning of Nicodemus's story
Yes.
that we read, where he's specifically sneaking away at night to go
Yes.
talk to Jesus because he's worried what other people will think.
Yes.
Just interesting connection there
Yes.
for me.
And it's that same thing that just keeps going. And then there ends up being a funny little aside that most people that have been in church know, where then God tells him to go out and destroy the whole Midianite clan and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And he tests God by saying, I'm going to put this fleece out on the ground, and if I make all of the ground around it wet in the morning, but keep that dry, and God does it. And then he says to do the opposite the next day, like make all of the dew land on the fleece, but nothing around it. And so he's constantly testing.
Sure is.
And so then when we get to chapter 7, this is where God's like, okay, I already know this cat. Like, he's not going to do it unless I give him a big fat dose of reassurance. So now he's like, he's whittled down the group from thousands and thousands to 300 people by making them go, and he takes the ones that I can't remember if it's either kneel down and laps water like a dog or doesn't, but he gets it down to 300 guys.
I think it was the ones who didn't go down all the way, because the ones who like stayed ready somewhat were the ones that he took,
the ones
right?
that ones that didn't lap like a dog, but lifted cupped their hands and drank it. Those were the ones that he went. So he got rid of got the best of the best. So now in chapter 7, during the night, the Lord said to Gideon, "Get up, go down against the camp, because I am going to give it into your hands. If you are afraid to attack, go down to the camp with your servant Purah and listen to what they are saying. Afterward, you will be encouraged to attack the camp." So he and Purah, his servant, went down to the outpost of the camp. The Midianites, the Amalekites, and all of the other eastern people had settled in the valley, thick as locusts. Their camels could no more be counted than the sand on the seashore. That's a lot of camels.
Yeah.
Gideon arrived just as a man was telling a friend his dream. I love this. "I had a dream," he was saying. "A round loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midianite camp. It struck the tent with such force that his tent overturned and collapsed. So just like he tore down the altar at night out of fear, he hesitated before battle until God gave him another sign through the Midianite stream. But I love it because at the start, what was he doing? He was threshing in the thing. And so
That's
so
so
he
cool.
Knew, I'm that round loaf of barley, which is an awesome thing to think of oneself. But his fear kept resurfacing at key moments, showing that his early hesitation wasn't just the beginning of a lifelong struggle, but it was it wasn't just the beginning. Like, it was something that was going to be a lifelong struggle and something that he was going to have to keep overcoming as he sought to obey God. Now, just so that way we don't think of Gideon as some cowardly dude, he didn't always act fearful. He was pretty bold in places, such as he's going to come through and he's going to rock this camp, and he's going to be chasing the kings off, and he's going to get to a town and say, "Yo, we've been chasing the two kings for a super long time. Give us some bread and some water because we're hungry and we're thirsty." And they're like, "No." And this is another Israelite town. He's like, "No, we're not going to do it. Do you have the hands of the kings that you're chasing bound anywhere?" And he's like, "No." And he was like, "Well, you can't get anything here." So they were acting out of fear. And Gideon's like, "When I do get them, I'm going to come back and you're all going to pay." And he did. Whenever he went, he got the kings, he came back, and then he got the town elders and everything, and he whipped them in full view of everybody, because that's the kind of guy Gideon is. But that was pretty hardcore. But so we do see that this was going to be a life cycle for him, where he was going to need constant reassurance, constant like signs and wonders, or he just wasn't going to obey. And then at the end of his like time as a judge, instead of maybe he should have taken on the role as a king then, he, instead of just like, or maintaining his time and just stayed as a judge, he set up a thing that eventually led them all to idolatry again. And he went off and retired and had a whole bunch of kids and a child with a concubine that ended up killing all of his legitimate kids, 70 of them in total. So, so that's just like, that's half-hearted obedience.
Yeah.
That had varying levels of success.
I'm interested to like just wonder about, because we don't actually know. We don't have quite as much material on Deborah in the Bible. So I'm curious if there were any. We don't have all that background for her. I wonder if she had any hiccups along the way, like Gideon did, because we're humans. Like
Yes.
we are all that way. So I don't know. Just point of curiosity there for me.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, we only have her. I mean, hers is a short little story, but I do think that it speaks to the way that, I know you're going to touch on it here a little bit, like the way that you can encourage and help spur somebody else.
Yeah.
And like, to use some of the lingo we have around here, like galvanize others whenever they themselves might be lacking.
Yeah.
So before we pick up the back half of this conversation on obedience, check out this clip.
Because guess what? I do in fact believe that Jesus is who he says he is. I do believe that Jesus has a purpose and a plan for every single person's life who's here today and who's not. I do believe that Jesus died on the cross and rose at Easter so that each of us could have direct and unhindered access to God. Something that we don't deserve, that I don't deserve. But God wanted so badly that Jesus gave his life so that we could have it. I believe all of that to my core. And by living my life in such a way that reflects the belief, I'm doing what Paul told us to do. You're doing what Paul told you to do when he said, live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Each of us has been called to obedience to Jesus by living our lives in a way that reflects the nature and character of God. That is the only thing Jesus asked us to do if we're going to take up our cross and follow him, as Pastor Alice talked about a few weeks ago. And please, don't mishear me. Don't get it twisted. I'm not saying we should never talk about God or be forthcoming with our faith. Not at all. I actually covered a lot of that subject based on Joseph's life in a conversation in the follow-up video I made for this topic. Please go check it out on our website. I think you'll enjoy it. All I'm trying to say right now is that living our lives in a way that Jesus commands us to, that does the talking for us. It's what shows the undeniable proof that you and I have been changed by Christ in an all-encompassing way.
Each of us has been called to obedience to Jesus by living our lives in a way that reflects the nature and character of God. That is the only thing Jesus asked us to do if we're going to take up our cross and follow him. And that is, to take up your cross and follow him means to fully obey and to fully trust in God. And like, we're not always going to get it right. Like we're going to stumble. And I think that's one of the things that's so powerful about the story of the judges is that you see the ones that did this well, and then you see the ones that didn't do it well. And when you look at Deborah's, her obedience and her galvanizing Barak to obedience led to 40 years of peace for Israel, and Gideon's kind of fearfulness, I mean, it did lead to some miraculous victories and things of that nature, but his story shows that partial obedience does have long-term negative consequences.
Yeah.
And that I think that's the takeaway for me on him. So where do you kind of see it?
So I actually am really intrigued by Barak's response to Deborah sharing what she's heard from God and telling him go do this, and him basically saying like, I'll do it, but I need some support. Like,
Yes.
I can really relate to that. Like, in particular, the idea of like, do it even though you're scared is it's easier said than done.
Yes.
And sometimes you need the backup. And I don't think him asking for her, and this is, the Bible doesn't say this. This is my opinion. This is my, how I'm reading through it is, I don't think it was necessarily a bad thing for him to say, I want you to come with us, because it's, he didn't get the credit for
And he went knowing that he wasn't
yeah,
going to.
he was okay with that. He didn't get all of the praise and the glory for taking care of Sisera. Like he didn't get that. But he clearly was okay with that, and that actually ended up because he said, this is how I can do it with the backing that I need. He ended up releasing a little bit, and then somebody else got to live out some form of obedience there. I don't really know. I don't know how much I don't know if Jael like heard from God, like do this right now, but either way, he used her. Whether or
Yes.
not she even believed in him, he used her in that situation. But I'm intrigued by his response to be willing to obey, but to be also willing to say, this is what I need from my community to actually follow through on what God has told me to do.
Yeah, and I think I don't always read that as a negative either for Barak.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that there are some people that do.
Yeah.
And you can read all about what they think on the internet.
But this is what we think.
But I don't read it that way.
Yeah.
Like I read it as, I don't even know if it presents that way in other translations of what Deborah said. Like it's just, okay, but because you want me to go along with you, you're not going to get the honor and the glory for this. And him saying, I don't need it.
Yeah.
Like I think that's a setting aside of what potentially would be like a very lucrative thing for Barak. But him saying,
That's true.
Like, I'll go and I'll do it. I just want the person speaking on behalf of the Lord to come with me.
Yeah.
And so I read that as a very positive, and I think the fact that it led to 40 years of peace, and the way that's the way that the story ends on a positive. It doesn't. I mean, Gideon's doesn't full stop. I mean, his story goes right into a full blown massacre, and him setting up something that led them astray.
That's true.
So and he did get all of the honor and the glory.
Yeah.
And he didn't take it and maybe he should have, and God would have been with him. And I mean, you can play what ifs all day, but I just find it the contrast there funny or interesting rather.
There's definitely something to be said for not like being willing to be obedient without your ego then getting in the way of, oh, I'm being obedient. Like,
yes.
I'm doing pretty great.
Yes.
So that's what I locked in on there.
And I read Gideon's wrapping up of him being fearful to do it.
Yeah.
That's how it reads for me, because if you take everything in his story, he does everything reluctantly, and then whenever he has an opportunity, I read it as his fear and insecurity leads him to say, listen, I'm not going to do it, but I will set up this gold thing to remind you of it, instead of just being the instrument and living out the calling and taking up his cross and maybe setting aside his own personal inclinations to doing what he should have done in the first place.
Yeah.
I kind of take it as that. So we read it, and then what do we think about it? And like, how do we apply it? So like for me, whenever I do find it difficult to obey, I kind of alluded to it earlier. I look at, yes, Jesus is the Lamb, and he's nice and kind and gentle, Jesus, but he's also our King. And whenever he comes back, he's going to be coming back in that fashion. So we should probably, for me, whenever I read Gideon's story, it's a reminder to set my own inclinations and fears and insecurities aside and obey,
Yeah.
because he's also King Jesus.
Yeah. That's good.
So that's what helps me whenever I find it difficult. Like the Son of Suffering, where we sing King Jesus a whole bunch of times there
Oh, I
at the
love
end.
that song.
And so that's where I go. Like
Yeah.
King Jesus.
Nice. Yeah, so I actually I kind of really relate to Barack there with him needing some support from someone else
Yes.
to go with him. Whether his motivation there was, I know that you are in right relationship with God, and I see that, and I need your support there with me, or it was because he was afraid and he just wanted the emotional support. I don't know what his motivator was exactly with wanting Deborah to come with him, but he did, and I can relate to that because
Yes.
for me, when I'm struggling to obey, it's really about who am I surrounded by, and accountability is a big deal for me. Something that I am not ever quite. I'm not ever quite myself if I don't have somebody encouraging me in the thing that
Yes.
I'm struggling in, and not just encouraging, but like being a little bit heavy-handed about it. Like not like yelling, but like asking legit questions like, okay, did you follow through? Do you have a game plan? Like, do you need help in some way? Like, can I buddy up with you and like we can do it together? Like
Yes.
it's very very influential for me.
Yeah, I mean, there's something. I mean, whenever, I mean, like it's all over the New Testament too, like a cord of 3 strands and all of these other things. And they didn't always go out individually; like they went out with buddies and pairs. And
Yeah.
there's something to surrounding yourself with people that are trying to help you be the person that you're professing that you want to be.
Yeah.
And so I thought it would be fun if we looked at where we got this right, and where we get this wrong sometimes. And for me, I think where I've gotten this right, even though it does come with a lot of pressure and it is outside of my natural state. My natural state is very much a wallflower people watcher. I typically, I have to push myself to act like an extrovert. And so I do think when it's come to like public speaking and leadership, I think just being willing to step outside of my comfort zone and take on those roles, I do think I've gotten that right. Where I know that I've gotten this wrong is probably one of the reasons why I can relate to Gideon a little bit. I struggle with fully embracing being what I like the way that the Psalm put this in 139:14, fearfully and wonderfully made.
Yeah.
I struggle with that. With that concept, even though that like I can logically know that it's true. Like I can look at scripture and take it at face value and say, yes, this is who Jesus says I am. Like I am a fearfully, wonderfully made person. I'm God's peculiar creation, as it says somewhere. We can put it in the show notes. There's a piece of scripture that in the King James that references humanity as that, and I like the idea of Jesus like elbowing somebody in heaven and saying, "Look at Michael, that's my peculiar little fella down there. I just love him." I struggle with that.
Yeah.
That doesn't, for a whole host of reasons, that just doesn't come naturally for me. And at times that does lead me to seek like approval from people rather than from just accepting it and knowing it of somebody that's already loved by God regardless of what other people think. So if I'm being like real, like that is someplace where I know that I struggle there and don't always get it right.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that for sure. Particularly like the image of myself. I feel like that's where most often a lot of my like negative like self-talk that I have to just kind of circle myself around all the time and remind myself of what's actually true, is just, it's so distracting.
Mhm.
And it's so easy to just sort of fade out from being intentional to like counter it. Like
Yeah.
it's so easy to just not do that, and then all of a sudden it's been 2 days and you're in a horrible mood and you feel terrible about yourself and you hate yourself and everything that you do, and you're like, what's happening? And then you're like, oh, that's right.
I'm laughing because like I know exactly
Yep.
what you're
Yep.
saying.
It's a cycle.
It is a cycle.
Yep.
It's an internal cycle that's very similar to
Yes.
the one that we outlined.
Yes.
Because it's easy to fall into it.
Yeah.
And so no, I got you. I'm tracking.
Well, so for me, when I'm in those spaces, I feel like I actually do, I'm bad at the thing that's helpful for me in obedience. So I've talked about accountability being the thing that helps me push forward in my obedience. And so how I get that right is the fact that I'm really good at, when I find someone that I connect with and I'm like, I know God put you in my life for a reason, I'm really good at getting to know them well, being authentic, showing my junk, like all my mess, and being willing to just be like, this is who I am and you can know the real me. I'm very comfortable doing that. And then I get it wrong when whenever when I'm chewing on something big in my life and like really like working something out in myself. I don't really know how else to describe it, because that can cover a lot of different situations. But whenever I'm in that space, I'm a slow processor and I'm an internal processor, and it's really easy for me to just kind of isolate myself in the thinking through everything. And then when I do isolate myself, I'm actively, whether I intend to or not, I'm actively excluding the people that will help me through whatever I'm processing and whatever I'm wrestling with God over needing to be obedient in. I'm keeping them out of it by just isolating myself. So that's how I get it wrong a lot. But
So what do you, once you find yourself there, like what is the thing that clicks and says, okay, I've got to get out?
Usually it looks like that sometimes it's that negative cycle of I'm like realizing, oh my gosh, it's been several days of me struggling mentally with how I view myself. That's usually like my warning sign of I'm not surrounding myself with the people that I need to help me carry through, or I'm not being honest with God, or I'm not even taking what I'm processing to God in the first place. Like, sometimes it's there subconsciously and I just don't, I'm like, it's almost like a form of laziness of I'm like, I don't want to deal with that in my brain.
Yes.
So I'm just going to put it on the back burner. And then I don't even like take it to God himself. Like that's usually like my warning sign of when I'm isolating too much is how much screen time I'm filling my time up with. Cause if I'm focused on my job and my people, I don't have much time for screens. So if all of a sudden I got time for screens a lot, I'm isolating. So that's usually like I'm getting consistently better at picking up on when I'm getting close to that. So that feels good. But it's taken me a while to get to the point where I've processed all that and learned my warning signs along the way.
So do you also have some people have a screen time alert thing that comes up on their phone.
I do, yeah.
So you've been intentional about putting some sort of check there to make sure that even if somebody's not saying something to you, like something is going to be like, ding,
Yeah.
like look at yourself. Like,
Yes. I actually have on my phone, like the way that I've set up my apps is I have like my first page of apps is like everything that is is work or like function related. And then the second page is all of the things that I would go to for entertainment. And I have like the screen time widget. I have an iPhone. I have the screen time widget at the top of that page. So it's like I have to face how much screen time I've spent before I can get to the apps that are underneath that have all of the fun things in them. And then I also have where it'll like pop up with a screen time limit at some point. But I do have to say I'm very blessed because most of my authenticity buddies are pretty good at chasing after me if I do isolate. So that's why it's so helpful for me, probably because it's like a built-in default there of like, hey, you following through on what you said you were going to do? Like they will chase it down. So that's good.
Okay. So one of the things that we thought that we wanted to be intentional with was like having a next step practical thing for this. So out of Gideon, for me, it was step out in faith even when feeling inadequate. So one, and I loved it. Pardon me. This is whenever he gets called in chapter 6, verse 15, after he gets called a mighty warrior while he's threshing in fear. Pardon me, my lord, but how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family. Like, I love that. Just pardon me, my lord. Stop waiting to feel ready. Like, if God calls you, he's going to equip you. And for me, like, it's going to sound silly, but I catastrophize whenever I'm feeling nervous about something. So for me, I imagine what is the worst possible thing that could happen. When I first started like hosting and leading a small group, I would imagine, or whenever I would just feel nauseous at the thought of coming in here, because my small group met in the big room here every Wednesday night for a long time before we started going to other people's homes for it. And I would pull in here and I would just feel sick to my stomach. And I would imagine like, what would the worst possible thing that could happen whenever I walk into there and sit down at the table? Like I just throw up all over myself while I'm trying to talk. Like that was the worst possible thing I could think of.
Yeah.
And then I would say, okay, well, will God still love me even if that happens? And I would just say yes. So like I would just self-talk. And just be like, and just remind myself that even if the worst possible thing happened, I'm still doing what God was telling me to do, and he will still love me even if that thing happens.
Yeah.
So that's a helpful tool for me. It might not be helpful for everybody to imagine worst case scenario, but for me, that was helpful. The other thing that I found really practical about Gideon's story was the tearing down of idols in your life.
Yeah.
So he was in 25 and 26, tear down your father's altar to Baal and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. Just get rid of anything that is taking priority over God, which it's interesting because that was the first thing that God told him to do. And then it was the last thing he did was set up an idol right there. Of his own. Yikes. So there's a little bit of irony there.
Yeah.
But anything that's taking priority over God, whether that be comfort, approval, success, or distractions, and just remove them. And then those were the two that I found to be really practical in helping to spur obedience. Was do it even if you feel scared.
Yeah.
Do it. And don't do it in the dark. Like do it right out in the open. That was just a sign of things to come for Gideon, was the fact that he was kind of halfway obedient.
Yeah.
And then get rid of anything that can cause you distraction from doing what God has called you to do.
Nice. I think another step that we can take from Deborah's story in particular is intentionally speaking life and encouragement over other people. So in Judges 4, verse 14, then Deborah said to Barak, "Go, this is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you?" So I love that, like the reminder. She's not just saying go do it, but she's giving him the truth of like, this is the reality of like, God's here and he's moving, and
this is what he's called you to do.
Yeah, exactly. So encourage someone who's struggling to take the next step in their calling, or maybe they're just struggling in general, and remind them of God's promises.
Like that's such that I love that, because it speaks right into what you were mentioning earlier about having somebody to hold you accountable and keep you going on what like she knew that he wanted to do what God called him to do.
Yeah.
So get after it, bud. Like
yeah.
like,
yeah,
I
and
love
then
that.
intentionally, like not just having that in your life for yourself, but then choosing to go out and speak into other people's and kind of participate back for them in sharing those promises, I think is really good.
No, and I think that's the best spot
Yeah.
to land. So we hope you enjoyed this conversation, and like, share, subscribe. We are active in the Facebook group.
We are.
And I love it.
I'm actually logging on to Facebook, guys. It's big. It's a big deal.
So we're in there. So find us there and join us. And we got a great little community of folks just talking and having conversations. If you leave us a review, we will send you one of our mugs here.
Yeah.
And we will see you back here next week for another episode of The After Chat.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us for The After Chat. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with others, post about it on social media, or leave a rating and review. To be the first to hear our next episode, be sure to hit the subscribe button and get notifications for new content. You can also follow us on social media on Instagram at PCC Wired and Facebook at Passion Community Church. For additional resources and links, check out the description. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time on The After Chat.